Okay, the first thing that you need to do if you want to call an API and grab data is to create the URL. We can see a perfect example with the one that we loaded in the browser. So we need the base URL followed by a question mark, followed by a query, followed by our API key. Okay, so we need to construct the URL, so we can go ahead and do that. We'll say that the URL string, if I scroll up, you'll see I have URL string as a global variable or a class field. Looks like this, and I actually provided an example. The only difference between this example and the example we loaded in the browser is it needs to be HTTPS. So you see here's an example. It has the question mark, which means it's a GET request, followed by key value pairs. The key is Q, which stands for query, and then I have equals, and then the value is Microsoft. And then I have an ampersand, which separates the next key value pair. The key is API key, and the value is equal to your actual API key. Here's an example API key that doesn't work anymore. And if I had another key value pair, I'd put another ampersand, followed by key, followed by an equal sign, equal to value. Okay, and that's how a GET request works. You can see a GET request in the browser, which is why I put this sample URL there. This is what we need to build. Now this search string, the search query is going to be dynamic based off what the user puts. And our first default one is going to be University of Missouri. So if I scroll down, we can create this URL string. We can say URL string is equal to the base URL string, okay, which is based off the documentation, plus we need the question mark, which represents a GET request. We talk about GET and POST requests in Web Development 1 and Web Development 2, which is 2830 and 4830. So if you've taken 2830, you already know GET request. And you'll see here's the key, followed by an equals, no space, followed by the value. Now the value is going to be the search string. Okay, it's going to be the search string. You'll see the search string is passed in as a parameter. It's going to be passed from the controller. Remember, this is the model. So the model is going to tell the controller exactly what to do. Let me draw this out. Hopefully you can see the whiteboard. Okay, so remember I have my view. Okay, here's my view, which talks to the controller. And then the controller talks to the model. Okay, so I type a search string like University of Missouri and I hit go. The view tells the controller, hey, the user hit go and here's the search string. The controller says, okay, I have this search string model, go to the API and get the data. So the model goes to the API. Here's the API, which is the New York Times. Okay, so this is our API. And the New York Times API gives us back articles. So the model says, hey, API, I need all articles with University of Missouri. API says, okay, here's JSON. And it returns back the JSON. Okay, so this is going to return back JSON. And the model says, okay, I'm going to take this JSON, I'm going to parse the JSON. Okay, so it's going to parse the JSON and store it in the array list. Okay, we had that array list up at the top with all the New York Times articles. So I'm going to store the web URL, the snippet, and all the corresponding information in that array list. And then once that's done, the model is going to say, hey, controller, I'm done. Here's the array list. Here's the array list with all the articles. Okay, so it's going to pass back the array list. And the controller is going to say, okay, I have the array list, and now I need to show it to the view. I need to show it to the view. And the way that we're going to show it to the view is with that observable array list I showed you earlier. It's an observable array list. Okay, and you'll see the view never talks to the model directly because we're implementing MVC. So the view tells the controller, hey, here's the search string. Controller says, okay, model, go get the data. Model goes to the API. API returns back JSON. Model parses the JSON and stores it. Model tells the controller, I have the data and it's ready. The controller says, okay, I'm going to update the view for the user. User clicks on an article. They say, hey, I want to view this new article. Controller says, okay, model, give me that article. Model says, okay, here's the article. And then the controller displays the article for the user. Okay, and this is how MVC would work if you have an API. Going back to the code, hopefully you can see the code. That's what we're doing here. The controller is going to pass the search string, and the model is going to go and grab the data from the API. Now, after I do the search string, I need to provide my API key. Okay, you can see that in the example URL up above. So I need to have an ampersand, which separates key value pairs. The next key is going to be API-key equal to, and then actually your API key, which is stored above. Okay, you'll see API key is camel case. And that is our URL. Now, what I recommend you do before you get too much further is actually print this out. Print out the URL and see if it works in the browser. Okay, and see if it works in the browser. Now, how can we get this load method to run? So we have the load method. It's going to create the URL. We're going to print it out before we proceed. We need to call this load method from the controller. So if I go to the controller, you'll see I have load news. Okay, we're not going to display all the information, but we are going to go ahead and load the news. So we're going to call the load method. So from the news manager, which is our model, we have the news manager. We're going to call the load method and pass the search string from the user. Okay, you'll see I have an error here. It looks like a compile error, but it's not. Load must throw an exception. Okay, if I add a throws clause or a surround statement with a try catch block, you'll see an exception could occur. And I'm not going to parse through all the news stories. Let's just go ahead and see if we can do the load method. So I'm going to comment that out. And this looks good. I just want to call the load method to see if this works. So if I run this, we should be able to type something. Okay, we should be able to type something and see something in the console. So if I type in University of Missouri and hit search, you'll see the URL printed out here. So if I copy it and paste it, will it work? So I'm going to paste it here in the browser. Do I get information back? I do. Okay, you'll see it does work. If I look for a web URL, okay, I can grab a corresponding web URL and see if it actually works when I load it in the browser. So if I select this and paste it in the browser, does it work? You'll see it does. Okay, I can load that corresponding story. So it's all working. Okay, it's all working. But you'll notice here something. Here it says University of Missouri, and I have spaces. And when I load it in the browser, something happened. So I come back, you'll see it doesn't have the space. It has %20. %20, what does that mean? That's a hexadecimal value. So if I look up hex for %20, okay, and this is going to be ASCII. So if I look up the ASCII table for %20, okay, you'll see the hex. So if I go to hex 20, you'll see that's actually a space. So when I print it out, I have spaces. When I put it in the browser, it actually does an encoding. It encodes the spaces as %20s because spaces aren't allowed here. If I go and remove these and just put spaces here, it encodes them. The browser does that automatically because it's smart, but our program's not going to do that automatically. So if we were to run this URL, it's actually going to crash. We need to encode the URL before we can actually run it. Otherwise, it'll crash. So when I come back, we can't just take the search string directly. In fact, this is a bad programming practice. If you've ever built a website, you probably heard of SQL injections or URL hacking. You don't want to collect the user input and take it directly. You always want to encode it and make sure it's actually going to be loaded as a string and not a command. And you want to make sure they don't put any illegal characters, which could mess up your application. I'm going to show you how to do that in the next video. So stick with Professor Wergeles, and we'll see you in the next video.